Hello everyone and welcome to this next installment. This will be part number 19 of Deception and Countermeasures in the Xiangqi opening. It is based on a free ebook that can be found on the World Xiangqi Federation website at the link given below. This book is also one of three books in a trilogy, and these three books have been deemed as one of the most important books on opening theory in Xiangqi in the 1990s, and I think it was last year or 2 years ago there was a reprint. So without further ado, let us look at today's topic, which is very practical. Okay, central cannon, greenhouse defense, and red would choose the 7th pawn advancement variation. Black will counter in the same manner. File chariot, protect the cannon, pawn rank chariot, and black has finally decided to use the left Riverbank horse variation. This is one of the major opening systems in Xiangqi, central cannon versus greenhouse defense with the left Riverbank horse variation. Now, one of the most important things when playing this move is that it will become a very aggressive counter. The situation on the board will become very tense very quickly. By playing h7 plus 6, black would be prepared to push p7 plus 1 for discovered attack on the red chariot. So the initial stages of this opening will concentrate on this area of the board and how red would try to avoid capture while still apply pressure on the black chariot and cannon. Now, in the book, the first major variation was r2 minus 2, whereby black would try to avoid capture by retreating his chariot. Now, this would not be a wise move. Instead, h8 plus 7 should have been played. This would allow for natural development of the chariot of red's left flank, and red will be able to counter very aggressively. And since red did not move or did not retreat his chariot, black would of course continue with his plans, and this would be the content of the second variation. Now let us go through the first variation, whereby red chose to move his chariot back to the riverbank. Now this would result in a loss of tempo because the chariot had used up 1, 2, and now 3 moves just to move to this position, when it could have simply been r1 equals to 2 followed by r2 plus 4. And since this happened, black would immediately counter with c2 minus 1, whereby black would be prepared to play c2 equals to 7 to move the cannon to this position and add pressure on red's right flank. Now there will be 4 major pieces, 1, 2, the cannon over here, and the horse. So how should red react? Now in the first one of the sub-variations, p3 plus 1 was studied. Another possible variation would be to play r2 plus 4, r2 equals to 4. But if this were played, black would simply push the cannon to the riverbank to protect the horse and be prepared to play r2 equals to 6 to threaten the red chariot. Now if this was so, the red chariot, as can be seen, would not have many places to go. This intersection will be covered by the horse. Perhaps the only viable position would be c4 equals to 5 or c4 equals to 1, or maybe moving back the chariot back again. But in doing so, red would have lost even more tempo. So black would have seized the initiative away from red, and red would be in trouble. Now if b3 plus 1 were played to attempt to trade pawns, black would accept. Now it would not be a good idea to try something funny with, say, c2 plus 4 to attempt a skewer, hoping that because by playing this move, red cannot counter properly. However, it will simply play h8 plus 7 to threaten the cannon. And if black tried to advance or capture the pawn as planned, red will counter chase the horse, and black would lose faced with the predicament of losing material. So one might say that if a pawn could be pushed, black could simply move the horse to safety, and the cannon would still be lost. Now if black tried to play c2 equals to 7 to threaten the cannon, but in doing so, red would now still have firm control of the situation on the board. Now this is because this chariot will still have pinned the black cannon and chariot in the same file, where these two pieces would be rendered immobile for the time being. And because the elephant had moved to the edge file, it would prevent the pawn from advancing, and also deny the black cannon any more of a target to attack. And the black horse on the riverbank would be in an embarrassing predicament too, because there would not be any good intersections for it to move to. So that is why c2 equals to 7 would not be the good idea. Counter chase, and again black would lose material. So p7 plus 1, it would be advocated, and red should try to advance his chariot to threaten the black horse. Now capturing the pawn would not be a good idea, because black would now play c8 equals to 7, whereby the black chariot will now be a fearsome entity, and by moving the cannon here, black will still be prepared to play c2 equals to 7 for double cannons to attack this very weak flank. So red will be in all sorts of trouble. Sacrificing the horse, check, and after sacrificing the black horse, black will now have managed to position the cannon in a very, very, very strategic position, and would now be prepared to play r2 plus 9 to gain material with discovered checks. And if red tried to play k5 equals to 4 to prevent capture and also threaten the advisor, black would simply counter in this manner. And therefore, after sacrificing the horse, black would have a very dynamic position and be prepared to attack. And that is why r2 plus 1 should have been played. Now, this would be essentially sacrificing the black horse. Now, if black would usually not want to capture the horse, or now if the black chariot captured the pawn, say for example, black would deliver a check and capture the chariot. So that is why the pawn would be poisoned, and red would usually not dare to capture it. So it might seem to be a worthwhile bargain. As can be seen, black had sacrificed 2 horses so early now. Check. And again, this chariot would be in a very embarrassing spot, where it would not have any good moves to make, and red would have concentrated 1 chariot, 1 cannon, and 1 pawn attacking the flank. So lost material will be regained, and black would have a very, very, very powerful advantage. So that is why red should capture the pawn. Short review. And in doing so, black would play r8 plus 2 and be prepared to play c2 equals to 7 as mentioned. So this is a very important variation or line to memorize. A short review. When the left riverbank horse is played, it would not be a good idea to play r2 minus 2. Or black would start to counter with c2 with minus 1, and all hell break loose. Okay. Okay, as can be seen, c2 equals to 6 will be played next, and red would be in all sorts of trouble. So, as mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video, the suggested or recommended move would be for red to play h equals plus 7, advance the horse to develop his left flank. Now, the burning question to answer now, what would happen to the red chariot, because black would definitely go ahead to play p7 plus 1. So, at this point in time, it is advised that red play r2 equals to 4. This is not a good idea because black would simply retreat his horse and still threaten the chariot, and this would place red in a predicament. If r2 minus 2 were played, red would simply form a skewer by advancing his cannon, and this pawn would be become a very big headache for red. If r2 equals to 3 were played, black would simply retreat his cannon. This cannon would now be used to protect the horse, and this would be one of the commonly seen formations in the screen house defense. And red would not have profited have any profit in this situation. So let's go back. r2 equals to 4 is the recommended move. So at this point in time, there are 3 variations that will be discussed. The first will be h6 plus 7, whereby black would choose to deal with the issue of this horse by capturing the pawn. The other would be h6 plus 8, and the final one would be to simply trade pieces by advancing the pawn. So in the first major subvariation, h6 plus 7, black would choose to attack the enemy pawn and advance his horse forward. Now, at this point in time, a good idea would be to play c5 equals to 6 to deny the red horse a target to attack, because by doing so, black would be prepared to capture to trade the horse for the cannon and then push the pawn forward. So if say r4 equals to 3 were played, capture, and as can be seen, at this point it will be a calm situation. This would be a rather even situation, but red would not have made any gains for its opening, and neither would black. So r4 equals to 3 would not be a good idea. Instead, c5 equals to 6 would be perhaps the best option. Some defense, and red will continue to add pressure on this black chariot and cannon. Would r4 equals to 3 be a good idea? It will definitely not be so, because black had already played e7 plus 5 and will now trade chariots. So as can be seen in the opening phase, the red chariot had moved too many times, and this would result in a loss of tempo. Therefore, r4 equals to 2 is advocated. Black will usually play r1 plus 1, and the offending pawn will be targeted, protecting the pawn, and hit e7 plus 5. By this time, red would have set up a rather decent defensive formation, and black would have spent 2 moves to move the pawn to this position only to be captured. So there would be a loss of 2 moves on black's part, which would compensate for the red chariot moving to and fro. So in variation 1, as can be seen, red will play h8 plus 7 for natural development of the left flank, and this will be the first subvariation. And red can be very satisfied with this position in the opening phase. The second subvariation would be h6 plus 8, whereby black would try to capture the horse and also advance the pawn depending on how red would react. And the advisable or the recommended way of countering for red will be p3+1 to sacrifice the horse. Moving the horse to safety would not be a good idea because the pawn will now be a big threat, and black could be prepared to play h8 equals to 6 to go for the elbow horse. Black can be satisfied with this situation. So p3+1 is advocated, and black will usually be forced to capture or accept the sacrifice. H8 equals to 7, what would happen? And by this time it will be a good idea. Now would be the correct time to retreat the horse, because at this point in time the black horse would not have any good place to move. It would be stuck here. The elephant will be guarding this position, so it cannot go h8+9. And for the moment, the red horse will be protecting the elephant, so the threat of a smothered cannon checkmate would not be present. So red would actually make gains by retreating his horse at this time. Sorry. And after red would gain back lost material and delivering a check. If red did not capture it, red would gain a headhunter cannon, which would be a very, very, very powerful entity so early in the game. Check. And as can be seen, red would now still have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. Black will still have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. But as can be seen, red's pieces are in the open and very well developed. The pawns are ready to cross the river. And in terms of piece kind combination, red would have a 1 chariot, 1 cannon, 1 horse combination still available on the board, while black would be limited to line attacks with his cannons and chariots. And moving red would now consolidate his defense with a6+5, and it will prevent black from attempting any mischief. Red could continue with e7+5 to develop his chariot as a kingside chariot, and at this point in time, red would have a significant advantage. So this would be variation, the second sub-variation. The last final variation would be black charging the pawn forward. So horses are traded, and at this point in time it would be recommended for red to play h7+6 to try to capture the pawn. It would not be a good idea at this point to play r4 equals to 2, because the black pawn will now be allowed to make mischief. And at this point in time, because of the fact that the pawn was here, moving the elephant to the central file is not advisable, and red would have to be able to try to relieve some pressure with this awkward formation at this point in time. So red would not have gained much, and h7+6 would be advocated. And black would try to counter aggressively with a central cannon of his own. p7+1 would not do much. These were the moves that were suggested in the book. Now, red would try to storm this line. And at this point in time, as can be seen, only one black pawn was threatening the red pieces, while red's other major pieces were very well developed and ready to go. So red will enjoy a huge advantage at this point, and this is why p7+1 is not a good idea. Instead, black should try to counter aggressively with c8 equals to 5, and red would take the opportunity to trade material. Black would try to counter. What would happen if black captured the pawn, let's say, just to show beginners? As can be seen, the chariot will now command a very strategic position. The horse the black horse will be now put in a dilemma, and red will still be able to capture the offending pawn. And once this pawn is captured, it would mean that black would have wasted at least 1, 2, 3, 4 moves so early in the opening phase of the game. So this would be extremely advantageous to red. So C8 plus 5, R8 plus 5, trading material. Now this trade would be different from red's because after capturing the black horse, the red pawn was still threatening the cannon, which will force it forward. And as can be seen, as mentioned just now, by capturing the black pawn, it would mean that black would have lost 4 moves in terms of tempo. So at this point, it would be obvious that red would have a huge advantage with the pawn, and he could always prepare to capture the black cannon. And although it would be a race, but red would have the upper hand. So a short recap. Today's lesson is very important. It is one of the fundamentals of the left riverbank horse. Okay, the left riverbank horse variation, and this was the first main variation whereby red decided to move his chariot to safety with R2 minus 2, and it led to a situation where black was able to counter very aggressively. So therefore, instead of R2 minus 2, H8 plus 7 for natural development of the material was advocated. Black would have to go ahead with his plan, and it would be recommended to play R2 equals to 4. In the first subvariation, H6 plus 7, second H6 plus 8, and third and last final variation would be P7 plus 1. In H7 plus 1 plus 7 variation, after some maneuvering, we can see that the black pawn will be captured, and this would imply a loss of 2 moves, so 2 plies. And red's formation now would be very firm, very versatile, and able to counteract any black attacks soon. In subvariation 2, black would play H7 plus 8, which would lead to still a position whereby red would have the advantage. And last but not least, the P7 plus 1 variation that would lead to red having a nice game. So I hope you've enjoyed today's rather long video on opening theory. Now today's video is a very, very important one because it explains the concept of what to do when the horse had moved to the riverbank. So if you like the work that I've been doing, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.